Hey guys, tonight we drift into a story that's half river, half dream, and entirely stitched together with Huck Finn's restless feet. You feel the damp smell of mud banks, you hear the frogs buzzing in the dark, and you picture a boy with a straw hat tilted just so, looking at the wide Mississippi like it's both playground and prison break. It's a warm night, heavy with insects and distant music, and you probably won't survive this. Let's be honest. Because the mosquitoes alone would eat you alive before you ever made it halfway downriver. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I love knowing who's drifting along on these nighttime journeys. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The river waits. You stand with Huck, or rather in Huck, because this is second-person territory. You are Huck now. And you're in Missouri, a little before the Civil War, a little after boyhood has already been spoiled by too many rules. Civilization, with its stiff collars, its Sunday sermons, and its constant scoldings, presses in on you. But out there, the river, that's freedom. The Mississippi is enormous, far larger than any map in your schoolhouse can capture. At its widest it stretches miles across, and its currents carry everything from driftwood to steamers, from rafts of lumber to rumors that travel faster than horses. Historians still argue whether Huck's Missouri really captures Mark Twain's own boyhood Hannibal, or a slightly romanticized version of it. Either way, you feel the mixture of nostalgia and critique. Twain paints the setting as both cozy and suffocating, a place where children play barefoot but also where society's hypocrisies simmer beneath every parlor conversation. Your feet itch against the wooden floors of Widow Douglas's house. She wants to civilize you, make you sit straight, learn your prayers, stop cussing like a riverboat deckhand. You tug at the collar of your clean shirt, already longing for your old rags, because they didn't squeeze you around the neck like a leash. And speaking of leashes, there's Pap, your father, more ghost than guardian. He stumbles in and out of your life, bringing liquor fumes and unpredictable tempers. Every time you think he's gone for good, he surfaces like a log snagged on a bend, blocking the current. He keeps you trapped in a cabin, nails the doors shut, and reminds you that even on the wide frontier, adults can build prisons anywhere. One quirky detail: frontier cabins were sometimes chinked, with clay and moss between the logs to keep out drafts, but in Pap's case, it only keeps you in, like a birdcage sealed with mud. You learn quickly, if you want freedom, you'll have to fake your own death. Not exactly a polite bedtime topic, but remember, we're telling this gently. You smash a pig, splash the blood, scatter the tracks, and suddenly you're not a runaway boy, you're a vanished soul. There's a macabre humor in it. You hide in the woods listening to townsfolk firing cannons over the river, thinking it might make your drowned body float to the surface. Spoiler, cannons don't actually work that way, but hey, frontier science had its quirks. The raft calls to you long before you find Jim. Logs lashed together, it's a floating patch of possibility. Imagine lying flat, stars sprawling overhead like spilled sugar. The river hums, constant and low, while your mind wanders to places southward, New Orleans, maybe even beyond. Fun fact, by the 1840s, New Orleans was one of the busiest ports in the world, funneling cotton, sugar, and every ounce of gossip the river could deliver. It meant that anyone floating past Missouri was eventually connected, however loosely, to global trade networks. You, barefoot boy, are already brushing shoulders with empire. But first, silence. The frogs drone, the cicadas buzz, and you feel yourself stepping away from the widow's parlor and Pap's cabin into a zone of twilight freedom. The reality check: mosquitoes are thick, you've got no GPS, and your raft is about as sturdy as a dining table. You probably wouldn't last a week. Still, there's something healing about pushing off into that dark current. Huck doesn't need the world to approve. He just needs the water to carry him. Historians still argue whether Twain's Mississippi is a real geographical river or a symbolic one, a mirror where society's follies float by in miniature. You can debate that later. Tonight, you lean against the rough logs, listening to the current slap and whisper, and you let yourself imagine slipping the grip of civilization altogether. Huck may be only half sure of his escape plan, but you feel the first breath of freedom in your own lungs. A ripple passes the raft, maybe driftwood, maybe a catfish, maybe one of those stories you'll never pin down. The moon stretches a pale road on the surface, a private lane no mapmaker ever inked. You don't know what waits downstream, but tonight you've chosen the river over the parlor, mud over polished floors, uncertainty over certainty. And strangely, that choice feels more secure than any roof. Remember the crocodile dung sunscreen from that other night's tale? Well, this is no better. Huck's only protection from the sun is a floppy hat and the hope of cloud cover. You'll burn, you'll itch, you'll slap at bugs, and yet, you'll also feel lighter than ever before. The Mississippi has claimed you, and once its current takes hold, you're part of something that no one, not Widow Douglas, not Pap, not society's stiff rules, can easily cage again. You stretch out, drifting, half worried, half thrilled. A raft, a boy, and a river. The journey begins here. The raft drifts, steady as a heartbeat, and the night air smells like damp willow branches and muddy water. You adjust yourself on the rough logs, feeling every bump and knot against your back, until the river's rocking lulls you into something close to comfort. And then, you're not alone. There's Jim. He's sitting cross-legged, humming softly to himself, maybe about food, maybe about freedom, maybe about both. Jim has a way of making silence feel companionable, like the raft isn't empty but alive. You and he exchange glances. He's escaped too, though for reasons even heavier than your own. He's fleeing the chains of slavery, those invisible manacles that weigh more than Pap's locked cabin door ever could. Historians still argue whether Twain meant Jim to embody a single man's struggle, or to serve as a broader symbol of enslaved people yearning for dignity. But you don't need a debate to notice how real his presence feels. The way his hands move with practiced care, the way he squints at the river like he knows it might trick you at any bend. The raft itself is a wonder. Imagine how much trust you must put in a bundle of logs lashed together with rope and maybe a few bent nails. Frontier rafts were often just temporary vehicles, built from timber meant to be sold downstream once you arrived. Which means, technically, your home is also your cargo. Huck and Jim are floating on both a bed and a paycheck, if they ever decided to sell it. And let's be honest, it creaks like a couch from your college apartment. The sky overhead stretches impossibly wide, sprinkled with stars that blink like lanterns hung too high to reach. You and Jim begin naming constellations. Or rather, Jim tells you stories about them. He claims one cluster is a sign of luck for travelers. You squint, see nothing but dots, and mutter something sarcastic about whether luck has ever once shown up on time. That earns you a chuckle, which is the first time you notice how laughter feels louder on the river, echoing across the dark water. You swap tales the way kids today might swap memes, fast, exaggerated, and more about the reaction than the facts. Jim talks about witches riding him at night, about signs in the hair of cattle, about omens that whisper through owls. You, trying to be worldly, share rumors you've overheard in town, about steamboats exploding, about treasure hidden in caves. The truth doesn't matter much. What matters is that stories stretch the river wider than it already is. One quirky detail that might keep you up: 19th century folks really did believe in floating omens. Logs in the current could be read like fortunes, and an owl hooting near your cabin was often taken as a death warning. Superstition was a kind of backwoods weather report. It didn't always keep you safe, but it made you feel prepared. The raft, though, doesn't care about omens. It just slides, steady as a metronome, past sandbars and snagging branches. The smell of damp cottonwood drifts over you as the banks slip by. Fireflies blink in the trees, as though signaling that even the land is dozing. Sometimes you and Jim lie flat, heads resting on crossed arms, and say nothing at all. The quiet is thick, but not the kind that makes you fidget. Instead, it's a quilt of sounds: frogs, crickets, water slapping logs. You realize you could fall asleep right here, your worries tucked away in the dark. That's the strange magic of the raft. While the world argues and frets, the river simply carries. Still, beneath the calm, tension curls. You know every bend might bring trouble, boats, strangers, or news that makes Jim's freedom more fragile. The river isn't just a highway, it's a stage. People have been moving on this artery for centuries. Did you know the Mississippi has been a trading route since long before European settlers arrived? Indigenous peoples built towns, traded shells and copper, and treated the river as both market and myth. You're floating through a corridor of deep history, whether you realize it or not. Jim hums again. Maybe it's a work song, maybe just something to keep his spirits anchored. His voice is low, like a bass string vibrating through the logs. You close your eyes, hear it blend with the splash of water, and feel the tension in your chest ease. For once, Huck doesn't need to joke or squirm. He can just listen. Historians still argue whether Twain wrote Jim with full compassion or whether the humor sometimes slips into stereotype. But in this moment on the raft, Jim isn't a symbol, a debate, or a literary construct. He's a man, breathing beside you, sharing the same stretch of uncertain sky. And so, the raft becomes more than transport. It becomes a fragile island, two souls marooned together, floating through a country that might not welcome them ashore. You feel the odd piece of that paradox. Huck has never fit in with society, and Jim has been denied a place in it altogether. But out here, on planks tied with rope, there's equality. If you've ever tried to balance on a wobbly mattress, you'll know. It doesn't matter who you are, you'll both topple the same if you're not careful. The night rolls on. The stars keep their steady glow. You and Jim drift southward, side by side, toward futures you can't name. But at least tonight, you've got a raft, a friend, and a river that feels like it might carry you forever. The fire crackles low, throwing sparks into the dark like tiny shooting stars that burn out before they can tell their wishes. You crouch close to the glow, warming your palms while Jim tends the pot of something that smells halfway between stew and swamp. Out here on the sandbar, the Mississippi feels like an ocean in miniature, broad, rolling, whispering secrets that only the logs of your raft and the soles of your bare feet can understand. You spoon out the stew, trying not to grimace at its thinness. Huck's cooking isn't exactly a culinary revolution. Still, hunger makes anything taste decent, and besides, this is no restaurant. It's a campfire on the edge of nowhere. The smoke clings to your clothes, seeps into your hair, and will be there tomorrow morning when you wake. You joke that people pay big money these days to eat smoked food, but here you've earned the aroma for free. Jim chuckles, though he's more focused on making sure no sound travels too far. The river can carry voices for miles, something most townsfolk forget. A laugh at the wrong moment could drift to the ears of someone hunting you both. That thought makes you lower your voice, though the temptation to joke never leaves. A campfire demands laughter, even if it's the nervous kind. Historians still argue whether Twain based Huck and Jim's night camps on his own boyhood along the Missouri banks or on the countless raftmen's tales he absorbed as a steamboat pilot. Either way, the authenticity rings in every detail: the creak of rope, the slap of fish against the shallows, the endless hum of crickets. These are not the polished sounds of a novel, they're the messy, itchy sounds of real life. You poke at the fire, watching sparks fly upward into the velvet night. For a moment you imagine those sparks as other campfires along the river, hidden groups of wanderers just like you, laughing softly, maybe singing, maybe plotting. The Mississippi has always been a gathering place. Even in ancient times, the Mississippian culture built enormous earth mounds near its banks, creating communities where thousands of people lived, traded, and worshipped. The river isn't just water, it's a thread that has always stitched people together. The stew bubbles, and Jim tells a story, half serious, half silly, about a witch that once stole his hat and made it dance around the room. You tease him gently, asking if the witch taught the hat to waltz or maybe breakdance. He swats at you with a wooden spoon, and the two of you laugh quietly, the sound bouncing between river and trees. It's ridiculous, sure, but that's the point. Jokes keep fear from swallowing the night whole. One quirky tidbit you discover: frontier folk often carried a witch ball, a glass orb hung in cabins to ward off evil spirits. Imagine dangling a shiny marble in your living room and telling visitors, "Oh, don't mind that, it's just my anti-witch device." You're tempted to suggest to Jim that the raft could use one, but then you both realize glass balls wouldn't last a single bump against driftwood. The fire dies down a little, leaving only glowing coals. You stretch out, feeling the sand cool beneath your back, and stare up. The stars tonight are unusually sharp, almost as if the heavens themselves are trying to eavesdrop. Jim shifts beside you, humming low, his voice mingling with the crickets until you can't tell where one sound ends and the other begins. And then, a rustle. You sit up. Not a twig snapping under your own careless foot, but something else. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe a possum. Maybe worse, a fellow wanderer stumbling too close. Your heart pounds louder than the river for a moment, until the noise fades and nothing follows. You mutter a joke about killer squirrels, earning another chuckle from Jim. Humor, once again, patches fear. Historians still argue whether Huck truly matures on the raft, or whether his morality remains half-formed until the novel's close. But sitting here by the fire, you sense the subtle shift. Every choice feels heavier. Do you trust? Do you joke? Do you speak, or do you keep silent? A boy who once only thought about skipping school now thinks about survival and every crackle of brush. The stew pot is scraped clean, the fire dwindles to embers. You pull your jacket tighter, feeling the damp creep in, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes even young legs stiff in the morning. Yet there's comfort too, the sense that, despite all odds, you're alive, fed, and not entirely alone. You close your eyes, the faint scent of wood smoke clinging to everything, and let the river's murmur take over. The Mississippi doesn't care if you're saint or runaway, boy or man, free or enslaved. It just carries. And on this sandbar, with Jim's laughter still echoing faintly in your ears, you realize that sometimes the simplest luxuries, a fire, a joke, a friend, are enough to keep you afloat. The night fades into a pale gray dawn, and you wake with grit in your teeth, the kind that comes from breathing river air all night. Your skin is sticky with dew, and your hair feels like you dunked it in a barrel of humidity. The raft rocks gently, tugged by the current, while fog curls low across the surface of the Mississippi. Thick, rolling, white, like the river has pulled a blanket over itself and decided to sleep in. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, and suddenly the world is strange. Shapes blur. A log might be a man. A tree might be a house. The fog tricks you. The river, wide and confident by daylight, now feels like a labyrinth, one with walls that shift when you blink. Jim squints too, his face tense. You both listen, because sight is useless here. Somewhere in the distance, a voice echoes, laughter, maybe, or a call. But the fog bends sound, making it impossible to tell where it comes from. Historians still argue whether Twain based this fog episode on real experiences of river pilots. Steamboat captains dreaded fog because one wrong turn could smash a boat against a snag or strand it on a hidden sandbar. The Mississippi was dangerous enough in daylight. At night, wrapped in mist, it was like driving blindfolded. You tried to keep the raft steady, using a pole to nudge away from the invisible shore. Jim's voice is the only anchor you have. He calls out directions, guesses, prayers, whatever keeps you both moving forward. The raft feels tiny now, swallowed by gray nothingness. You joke that it's like drifting through a giant bowl of milk, which earns a nervous laugh. Then you add, hopefully not skim milk. Because even in danger, you can't resist poking fun at the bland. The fog presses thicker. You lose sight of Jim for a terrifying moment, though he's only a few feet away. Your voice rises louder than you meant, calling out, making the fog shiver with echoes. For a moment you imagine the river itself answering back, mimicking you in a tone just slightly off. Goosebumps crawl up your arms. Then silence. Heavy, muffled silence. Even the frogs and crickets seem to have taken the morning off. It's just you, Jim, and the creak of water against logs. You wonder if the river has swallowed every other sound, keeping them tucked away until it feels like releasing them again. And here's where trust gets tested. You and Jim have to rely on each other more than ever. He says one thing, push left, and you have to decide whether to obey, knowing one wrong move could spin you into disaster. It's not the Widow Douglas telling you what to do, or Pap's snarling threats. This is different. This is partnership. One quirky tidbit: fog itself was often treated like an omen in folklore. Farmers said it predicted rain or fair weather depending on how quickly it lifted. Sailors, meanwhile, claimed it was the breath of ghosts lost at sea. Huck might laugh at that, but here, shrouded and shivering, you start to wonder if the Mississippi has its own ghosts, drifting silently alongside your raft. The morning stretches on forever. The fog thickens again, playing with your nerves like a mischievous cat. When it finally begins to lift, the sun bleeds through slowly, painting streaks of gold across the gray. You can see Jim clearly now. His shoulders sag with relief, his face breaking into a grin that says more than words. You grin back, though yours hides a little shiver of what might have happened. Historians still argue whether Huck's experience in the fog symbolizes his moral confusion, or simply Twain's love of drama. You don't need to pick sides. You've felt the disorientation yourself, how easy it is to lose direction when the world clouds over, how desperately you cling to the nearest voice of reason. By the time the sun is fully awake, the river is itself again, broad, shimmering, full of promise. The fog has retreated to the edges, sulking like a magician whose trick failed. You and Jim, tired but safe, sit back on the raft and let the current take over once more. You lean on your elbow, gaze at the brightening sky, and crack one last joke. "Well, at least the mosquitoes didn't get lost in the fog." Jim groans, but his laugh comes anyway, rolling out like relief itself. The raft floats on, stronger than it was last night, not because the logs are any sturdier, but because trust has been tested and found intact. And down the river, the next bend waits, already hiding its own surprises. By the time the fog has burned away, the Mississippi shines wide and inviting, like a silver carpet unrolled towards somewhere you can't yet name. The raft drifts lazily, bumping a stray branch here, a snagged log there, until finally you see signs of life, chimneys, rooftops, and the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer. A town. Not the roaring kind you'd imagine from steamboat stories, but one of those sleepy river villages that pop up like mushrooms after rain. You and Jim ease the raft toward shore, nerves prickling. Towns are tricky. They offer supplies, gossip, maybe even a good laugh, but they also bring risk. Huck Finn isn't supposed to be alive, remember, and Jim isn't supposed to be free. But curiosity tugs harder than fear, and besides, you're both craving a break from fish stew and mosquito lullabies. Stepping off the raft, you squish into mud that smells like wet cornmeal. The streets are narrow, lined with wooden buildings whose paint is more wishful thinking than protection. Dogs nap under porches, and chickens strut like they own the place. You pass a general store, where barrels of molasses stand beside sacks of flour, and a barber's chair gleams in the morning light. Historians still argue whether Twain's depiction of these towns exaggerates their eccentricity or faithfully records the quirks he witnessed as a riverboat pilot. Either way, what you see is part market, part circus, and part gossip factory. Everyone knows everyone, and news moves faster than the current. You linger near the market, where farmers argue over tobacco prices and children tug at skirts begging for penny candy. A fiddler saws away at a tune that feels too energetic for such a hot morning. You grin at Jim and mutter, "Well, guess that's one way to wake up without coffee." And speaking of coffee, frontier towns often brewed it so thick that spoons could practically stand upright in the cup. A quirky tidbit: some households reused coffee grounds multiple times, stretching the flavor until the final brew tasted more like disappointment than caffeine. You thank your lucky stars you're not sipping that today. As you wander, you notice posters slapped onto walls: "Runaway slave, reward offered." Your chest tightens. Jim pulls his hat lower, edging into the shadow of a barn. Suddenly, every laugh, every glance, feels heavier, like it might turn into suspicion. You joke softly, "Relax, nobody cares about two river rats with dirty feet." But the truth is, danger sticks to the air like smoke. Still, towns are full of distractions. You overhear a man bragging about his prize pig, only for his neighbor to reply that the pig looks more like a mule in disguise. You chuckle, knowing full well that in small towns, insults are as common as greetings. Huck's sarcasm would fit right in here. A blacksmith's hammer rings, and you pause to watch. Sparks fly as he shapes iron, his arms moving with the rhythm of someone who's done this 1,000 times. The smell of hot metal mixes with horse manure, and you wrinkle your nose. Frontier life wasn't exactly scented like lavender. Fun fact: 19th century towns often smelled like a stew of animals, smoke, and tanneries. Deodorant wasn't a thing. People just hoped the air moved fast enough to carry the stench away. You and Jim slip into the crowd, trying to blend in. You buy a hunk of bread from a stall, chew it slowly, savoring how different it tastes from river rations. Simple luxuries mean the world when you've been living on catfish and campfire stew. Historians still argue whether Twain used these little towns as comic relief, or as biting critiques of small-minded America. The absurdity of gossip, the cruelty lurking under politeness, the way whole communities could turn on outsiders, it's all there, hidden beneath the fiddles and fried food. As the sun climbs higher, you and Jim retreat toward the river, keeping your heads low. The raft waits like an old friend, bobbing gently against the reeds. You push off, letting the current catch you once again. The village recedes, its gossip and stink shrinking behind you until it becomes just another smudge on the wide Mississippi's shore. You stretch out on the raft, bite into the last of the bread, and sigh. Towns may offer brief tastes of comfort, but the river offers something else: anonymity, space, the sense that you're part of something too big for gossip to reach. And so, with the sun high and the current strong, you and Jim drift southward again, bound closer by every shore you leave behind. The raft bobs along, quiet and steady, when two figures come crashing into your story like stage actors who've missed their cue but refuse to leave the play. You spot them scrambling along the riverbank first, one tall, thin, and pretending to be dignified in tatters, the other rounder, red-faced, puffing with desperation. They wave their arms wildly, shouting for help, as though you're the last ferry out of a burning city. Against your better judgment, you let them clamber aboard. They introduce themselves with grand flourish. One insists he's a duke, yes, a real duke, and the other claims he's the long-lost Dauphin of France, rightful heir to a throne across the sea. You blink, bite back a laugh, and think, really? This raft is suddenly international waters? Jim's eyes narrow, his silence louder than any protest. Historians still argue whether Twain invented these conmen purely for satire or drew them from real tricksters common on the river. The truth is, America in the 19th century was rife with impostors. With news traveling slowly, a smooth tongue could crown you anything, doctor, prince, or prophet, until the next town saw through your act. The Duke immediately begins giving orders, telling you where to sit and how to row. You exchange a look with Jim that says, "This raft barely fits two," now it's apparently hosting royalty. You mutter a joke under your breath about needing to paint the logs gold, and Jim smirks. But the humor doesn't erase the unease. These men are trouble. The Dauphin launches into tales of French courts, sprinkling his speech with random parlez-vous nonsense that sounds more like a bad soup recipe than royal French. You can't help but snort, asking if Versailles also had mosquitoes the size of apples. He ignores you, fanning himself with his hat as though the raft were a palace balcony. One quirky tidbit: actual European royals of the time really were fascinated by America. Lafayette, for example, toured the United States decades earlier and was greeted like a celebrity. But here on your raft, these royals smell less like cologne and more like they've wrestled pigs all week. As the day warms, the Duke proposes a scheme. He talks of staging plays in the next town, claiming audiences will pay dearly for Shakespeare performed on demand. His plan unravels quickly when you realize either he nor the Dauphin knows more than a handful of lines. There, Hamlet sounds more like a barnyard argument than high art. You roll your eyes, whispering to Jim that at least the mosquitoes have better sense than to pay for this show. Historians still argue whether Twain meant these conmen as reflections of larger social frauds, politicians, perhaps, or even organized religion. What's clear is how easily people can be dazzled by titles, how quickly they bend to a stranger's pompous claims. The Mississippi, wide as it is, can't wash away gullibility. By evening, the raft feels more crowded, the mood heavier. The Duke and Dolphin argue about who gets the better sleeping spot, finally collapsing in a heap of snores that sound like hogs rooting through a trough. You and Jim lie awake, staring at the stars, both thinking the same thing. These men are going to drag you into trouble deeper than any river channel. Yet there's humor in the absurdity. You whisper that maybe tomorrow you should introduce yourself as the Emperor of the Moon, see if they bow. Jim chuckles quietly, the sound almost swallowed by the water. The river keeps rolling, patient and indifferent, carrying 4 souls now instead of 2, 2 bound by friendship, and 2 bound by lies. The night deepens, and the raft creaks under the weight of false crowns. You wonder, not for the first time, how far you'll have to drift before freedom isn't shadowed by fools. The sun comes up, and with it, your newly acquired royalty start plotting their next masterpiece of trickery. The raft drifts toward another small riverside town, the kind with dusty streets, one sagging hotel, and a crowd always eager for anything new, even if that something is half-baked theater. The Duke and the Dolphin stand tall at the bow, like generals preparing for battle, except their army is nothing more than bluster and a couple of mismatched costumes. They chatter about how Shakespeare is too highbrow, so they'll shorten the plays into digestible chunks. The Duke rehearses his "to be or not to be" speech, stumbling after the first line and filling the silence with coughing. The Dolphin, meanwhile, decides to try Juliet's balcony monologue, but instead of grace, he ends up swatting at mosquitoes mid-sentence. You nearly double over laughing, though you cover your mouth when Jim gives you that stern look, the one that says, "Don't provoke them, we've got enough trouble already." Historians still argue whether Twain used these scenes to mock the pretensions of high culture, or simply to show that theater was one of the few amusements available along the river. In truth, frontier towns really did welcome traveling shows, even if they were terrible. People would pay a nickel just to hear something different than the cicadas buzzing in their ears. The quirky part? These con men decide the show needs a flashy advertisement. They paint signs that promise "The Royal Nonsuch, a play you can't miss." The catch? They print warnings in bold letters. "Ladies and children not admitted." That one line alone practically guarantees that every man in town will pay to see what scandal lies within. You admire their cunning, even if you loathe their arrogance. As you trail them into town, you notice how people gather in tight knots, whispering about the big show. Some say it must be a new kind of opera, others think it's traveling magicians. You want to laugh and tell them it's just 2 sweaty frauds with a borrowed curtain, but you bite your tongue. You've learned that on this river, people prefer the dream over the truth. The performance itself is a farce. The Dolphin runs across the stage nearly naked, painted in stripes, bellowing nonsense, while the Duke waves his arms like a frantic rooster. The whole thing lasts less than 2 minutes, yet the crowd roars, partly from laughter, partly from confusion, and partly because they'd paid their money and refused to admit they've been swindled. When the show ends abruptly, the men in the audience exchange a look, then one whispers, "We can't let on we've been fooled. Let's trick the next night's crowd into suffering it too." And so it goes. Night after night, new audiences arrive, convinced the previous ones saw something too scandalous to repeat. The con men make a small fortune in nickels and dimes while you sit on the edge of the stage, watching with equal parts horror and amusement. You can't help muttering to Jim, "If this is culture, I'll stick to raft songs." Historians still argue whether Twain exaggerated this absurd spiral of gullibility, or if such joke shows were genuinely common. Records do suggest, however, that frontier entertainment often straddled the line between serious and slapstick, and that people, perhaps out of boredom, would endure almost anything for a laugh. By the 3rd night, though, the scam collapses. The angry townsfolk show up armed with rotten vegetables, ready to pelt the so-called royalty off the stage. You and Jim slip out early, ducking behind the hotel, your stomach hurting from stifled laughter. On the raft that night, you replay the image of the Dolphin stumbling over a barrel, face first into the mud. Even Jim chuckles this time, though his chuckle carries the warning that these men won't stop at cheap laughs. The river swallows the echoes of the town as you drift back into the night. Stars gleam above, calm as ever, while the Duke and Dauphin snore away, dreaming of their next ridiculous scheme. You and Jim, though, lie awake again, listening to the river's whispers. You've seen enough of their tricks to know one thing. This play isn't over, and the next act might not be so funny. Morning breaks on the raft with the Duke and Dauphin boasting about their success. In the theater world, though success looks suspiciously like half a basket of stale biscuits, and a few coins jingling in the Duke's pocket. They brag about being artists misunderstood by the masses, while you and Jim exchange a look that says, if that's art, then a cow bellowing is opera. Still, you keep your mouth shut, because mocking them would only bring more trouble, and you've already got enough with the river itself. Soon the conmen sniff out another opportunity. Word spreads of a wealthy family nearby, the Wilkes family, struck by misfortune after the death of Peter Wilkes. The Dauphin's eyes light up in that sly way you recognize all too well. He decides he will pose as the long-lost English brother, arriving just in time to inherit the estate. The Duke agrees to play his companion, and suddenly you're swept along in a scam that makes the earlier theater trick look like child's play. The town greets the so-called heirs with open arms, even though the Dauphin's accent sounds more like a drunk pirate than an Englishman. People line up to shake his hand, some even weeping, while he milks the attention like a prize-winning cow. You hang back, feeling your stomach twist. This isn't harmless nonsense anymore. This is a grieving family, and you can almost hear Jim mutter under his breath, shameful, downright shameful. Historians still argue whether Twain intended this episode to show the gullibility of frontier communities or to spotlight the cruelty of opportunists who preyed on grief. After all, inheritance fraud was common in the 19th century, when paperwork was spotty and distant relatives could appear without proof. You can picture the awkward family dinners where someone swore to be Aunt Matilda's nephew from across the sea, while the real relatives whispered, was she even named Matilda? The quirky detail here? The Dauphin insists on delivering an emotional speech at the funeral, claiming he and Peter once shared tea with the Archbishop of Canterbury. You know it's nonsense, and judging by the raised eyebrows in the crowd, so do others, but grief has a way of clouding common sense. The townsfolk nod along, clinging to the idea that their beloved Peter left behind honorable kin. You, however, start to feel the weight of conscience. Watching the Wilkes sisters, especially Mary Jane, with her open kindness, you sense the sting of guilt. They treat you like family, smiling, offering you food, never suspecting you're part of a scheme that will rob them blind. You imagine how it would feel to lose someone you love and then be deceived by strangers posing as your kin. For the first time, you seriously consider exposing the fraud. At night you confide your thoughts to Jim, whispering under the cover of river fog. He listens, then nods slowly, telling you, doing right ain't always easy, but it's still right. His voice is steady, a quiet reminder that he too is running from chains, and that truth, in its own way, is freedom. You roll onto your back, staring up at the stars, wondering if the universe is nudging you toward courage. Historians still argue whether Huck's moral turning point in the Wilkes episode is the true heart of the book, the moment he begins to act not out of fear but out of compassion. Some say this scene is more pivotal than even the famous raft debates about slavery, because here Huck chooses honesty over complicity, kindness over convenience. When the conmen start demanding the family's inheritance, even digging into the coffin for hidden gold, your decision crystallizes. You quietly slip a note to Mary Jane, warning her of the scam. Her eyes widen, tears welling up, and you see something change in her, shock, yes, but also trust. She squeezes your hand with a strength that surprises you, and you realize you've just taken your first real stand against the Duke and Dauphin. It's risky. If they discover your betrayal, you'll be in danger, and Jim even more so. But the choice feels right in your bones, as steady as the river itself. That night, back on the raft, you feel lighter despite the risk. Jim notices too, smiling gently as if to say, you're growing up, Huck Finn, whether you like it or not. The conmen, of course, are oblivious, busy toasting each other with stolen whiskey, convinced their brilliance knows no bounds. You watch them from the shadows, half disgusted, half relieved, because deep down you sense their reign as royalty is beginning to crumble. And as the raft glides onward, you let the stars calm you, whispering promises of a freedom you're only just learning to name. The scam with the Wilkes family unravels faster than a poorly stitched quilt. At first, the townsfolk remain dazzled by the Dolphin's bumbling English act, but whispers ripple through the crowd. Someone remembers that Peter Wilkes had another pair of brothers who were expected to arrive from overseas. The longer the impostors linger, the more the doubts grow. You feel that nervous itch between your shoulders, the kind that tells you it's only a matter of time before things explode. Sure enough, the real Wilkes brothers turn up. And of course, they look nothing like the Duke and Dauphin. No surprise there, unless you're gullible enough to believe a man can shrink 6 inches and lose his accent overnight. Suddenly the town is split, arguing over which pair are genuine. The coffin even gets exhumed in a frantic attempt to settle the matter by checking for a missing tattoo. The scene is chaotic, like a 19th century courtroom drama acted out in the mud, with chickens squawking in the background. Historians still argue whether Twain exaggerated this episode for satire or drew directly from real frontier fraud trials. Records show that impostors often appeared to claim unverified inheritances, especially in boomtowns where paper trails were thin. One quirky tidbit? In some places, townsfolk would settle disputes by comparing family songs or recalling pet names, as if proving kinship required a musical number. Imagine standing in front of a jury, singing, "Papa used to call me Pumpkinhead, case closed." You, however, don't laugh. The tension is thick, and you sense that the scam has reached its breaking point. People begin to suspect the Duke and Dauphin, though the conmen keep up the act with stubborn bravado. They insist they are the rightful heirs, waving their arms, sputtering outrage, while the townsfolk narrow their eyes. Finally, when the missing gold is discovered in the coffin, right where the swindlers themselves stashed it, the crowd's patience collapses. The mob surges. Angry fists, shouted threats, a swell of voices demanding justice. You've read enough dime novels to know that when a mob reaches boiling point, someone's getting tarred and feathered. You grab Jim's arm, pulling him away from the chaos. The Duke and Dauphin barely escape with their lives, ducking blows and sprinting toward the river. You and Jim shove off quickly, paddling with desperate strokes until the shouting fades behind you. Out on the water again, the night feels eerily calm, as though the river is swallowing up all that fury. You breathe hard, heart still pounding. Jim claps you on the shoulder, muttering that you did the right thing, warning Mary Jane. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about saving people's dignity. His words sink deep, steadying you like an anchor dropped into quiet water. Of course, you're not free of the Duke and Dauphin yet. To your dismay, the two scoundrels manage to sneak back onto the raft, wet, furious, and somehow still smug. They complain about how ungrateful the townsfolk were, as if attempted fraud deserves applause. You and Jim bite your tongues, because survival demands patience. Historians still argue whether Huck's silence here is cowardice or cleverness. Some say it shows he's learning the art of survival, choosing when to fight and when to bide his time. Others argue Twain meant it as commentary on how good people often tolerate bad ones just to keep the peace. Whatever the case, you drift with the current, tension simmering beneath the surface like logs caught in a whirlpool. The quirky moment? Despite nearly being lynched, the Dauphin spends the evening drying his clothes by striking dramatic Shakespearean poses. He proclaims himself a tragic hero undone by cruel fate, while Jim snorts softly, nearly choking on laughter. You grin despite yourself, because even in danger, absurdity finds a way to bubble up like river foam. By dawn, the raft glides smoothly again, the crisis past but not forgotten. You lean on the rail, staring at your reflection in the brown-green water. Something has shifted. You're not just drifting anymore, you're making choices, even when they scare you. And though the Duke and Dauphin still lurk at your side, their power over you feels weaker, their bluster hollow. As sunlight spills across the river, you sense that the journey has tipped. The road ahead will not be easy. There will be betrayal, capture. Morning light warms the river as the raft drifts onward, but that uneasy truce with the Duke and Dauphin doesn't last long. You can feel it in the way they mutter together, whispering behind their hands like two kids plotting mischief in church pews. Jim notices too. His brow creases, and he shakes his head, murmuring that nothing good comes from men who smile when they're planning. You wish he were wrong. The two con men soon hatch their most outrageous scheme yet, performing a grand version of the Royal Nonsuch in a nearby town. But this time, they tweak the plan so the whole crowd feels tricked, and out of pride, nobody admits it. A clever fraud, sure, but also proof that the pair thrive on humiliation. You watch from the edge, thinking how small and mean their humor really is. And when they count their earnings, grinning like kings of mischief, you can't help but wonder whether all their cleverness is just another form of desperation. Historians still argue whether Twain built the Duke and Dauphin from specific real-life swindlers. Traveling showmen, patent medicine hawkers, and mock royalty impostors were rampant in the 1800s. One quirky tidbit? In 1825, a man in New Orleans claimed he was Napoleon's long-lost nephew and charged folks a fee just to shake his hand. He even had a fake French accent, though by all accounts it sounded more like he'd swallowed a harmonica. But soon, the scammy laughter ends. As the days drag on, the Duke and Dauphin grow restless, eyes darting at Jim. You see it coming, the thought crossing their minds like vultures circling overhead. Jim is valuable property in their eyes, not a man, and that gnaws at you like a splinter under the skin. You try to stay close, guarding him with small talk, with distractions, but the raft is small and tension seeps into every corner. One night, after you've dozed off to the sound of frogs and the steady slap of water, you wake to silence. Jim is gone. Panic surges through you, heavy as a stone. You stumble up, shout his name, hear nothing but your own voice echo off the dark trees. The Duke and Dauphin claim ignorance, shrugging as if they don't know where he went. But the smug glint in their eyes tells you enough, they've sold him. It feels like betrayal on betrayal. Not just their treachery, but yours too. You think about how you promised Jim freedom, how you'd sat by the fire sharing stories and food, swearing to stick together. Now he's been traded for quick cash, locked up somewhere waiting to be dragged further south. Your chest aches with the weight of it, like you've swallowed a chunk of lead. Historians still argue whether Huck's reaction here marks his true turning point. Until now, he's been drifting between loyalty and social norms, testing his courage in small doses. But Jim's capture throws him into a crisis so sharp that he can't avoid choosing anymore. Some scholars point out how Twain was mirroring America's moral dilemma, the struggle between convenience and conscience. Others suggest Huck's anguish was just the voice of Twain himself, exasperated with a society that treated freedom as negotiable. You wander the banks at dawn, thinking through every possibility. Maybe you could keep going, let the river carry you alone. It'd be easier. No one would question your choices. But Jim's face keeps rising before you, his jokes, his fears, his steady presence when everything else was shaky. You realize that walking away would haunt you more than staying. The quirky tidbit that surfaces in your exhausted brain? Somewhere, you once read about how sailors carried lucky charms to ward off guilt. Rabbit's feet, bent nails, scraps of cloth. As if small tokens could shield a person from hard decisions. But standing there in the gray light, you know there's no charm that can make this easy. You sit down, clutching your knees, and whisper into the damp air. All right then, I'll go to hell. It isn't a phrase of surrender, it's a declaration. You choose Jim, even if it means breaking every law, every sermon, every voice that told you freedom isn't for all. And though your words echo faintly, swallowed by the river, you feel something remarkable shift. For the first time, your choice isn't just about escape. It's about love, loyalty, and the stubborn refusal to betray what you know in your bones is right. With Jim sold and the raft suddenly an empty place, you feel like you're walking around with half of yourself missing. The silence is unbearable. Even the frogs and owls seem to mock you with their steady songs, as if they're saying, "You had a friend, and you let him slip away." You grab a stick and start scratching lines in the dirt, half-baked plans, angry squiggles, anything to keep your hands moving while your brain spirals. When the daylight comes, you march toward the town where you've heard Jim is being kept. It's Phelps's farm, and from a distance, it looks like the picture of southern hospitality. Whitewashed fences, rows of corn, and a big front porch where someone probably drinks sweet tea and gossips about neighbors. But you know better. Behind that veneer of charm lies the hard truth: people held against their will, their lives reduced to property deeds. Historians still argue whether Twain meant Phelps's farm to reflect a specific Southern archetype, or just the general culture of the antebellum South. Either way, it feels too real. You remember that in 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act had been passed, requiring even northern states to return escaped enslaved people. The law itself became a national flashpoint, with abolitionists furious and slaveholders doubling down. A quirky tidbit? Some towns in New England actually passed personal liberty laws that gave sheriffs legal excuses to stall or even refuse sending fugitives back. It was like passive-aggressive paperwork warfare. You edge closer, nerves jangling, and fate decides to play one of its strange tricks. Before you can even knock, Aunt Sally bursts out, grabs your arm, and calls you Tom Sawyer. Apparently, she's been waiting for him, and somehow you're the lucky understudy. At first, you think the jig is up, that she'll see straight through you. But no, she hugs you like a long-lost nephew. And just like that, you're undercover. The irony isn't lost on you. Pretending to be Tom Sawyer, your friend who always loved elaborate pranks, feels like stepping into shoes 2 sizes too big. You've never been much of a planner, your whole life has been more drift and dodge. But here, to save Jim, you'll need deception, patience, and dare you say it, strategy. You settle into the farmstead, trying not to choke on the sweetness of Aunt Sally's chatter. She fusses over your clothes, feeds you pie, and asks about home. You give vague answers, praying she won't notice your stammering. Uncle Silas, meanwhile, is the sort of kind, bumbling man who looks like he's lost his hat even when he's wearing it. Their warmth is genuine, which makes your mission harder. They're nice folks, but their kindness doesn't erase the cage they've put Jim in. That night, lying in a feather bed that feels way too soft, you wrestle with guilt. You've seen Jim's prison, a shed, locked and guarded. Every creak of the house reminds you that he's only a stone's throw away, yet separated by chains and customs older than either of you. You imagine him curled in the straw, dreaming of his family, unaware that you're so close. Then comes another twist. Tom Sawyer himself arrives. Yes, the real Tom. He greets you like you've been waiting for him all along, and after a moment of shock, you realize this could actually work. With Tom's flair for drama and your determination, Jim's rescue feels possible. Historians still argue whether Twain intended Tom's reappearance as comic relief or biting satire. After all, Tom's plans always lean toward the ridiculous, turning even simple tasks into 3-ring circuses. But Twain might have been poking fun at society's tendency to complicate moral clarity. After all, Huck had already decided to free Jim, simply and directly. Tom, on the other hand, insists on layers of schemes as if morality needs fireworks to be valid. A quirky tidbit? In medieval Europe, some knights wouldn't duel without staging elaborate ceremonies, marching, trumpets, pageantry. People seemed to believe even serious life-or-death matters needed extra flair. Tom Sawyer, in his own way, is just reenacting that tradition. If you're going to do something noble, might as well sprinkle it with theatrics. The night grows quiet again, and you stare at the ceiling beams. Tomorrow, the rail work begins. Plans will be drawn, tunnels imagined, spoons stolen, ropes braided from sheets. It's not just about freedom anymore. It's about how far you're willing to go, how much mischief you're willing to stomach, just to honor the vow you made to a friend by the river. The next morning, Tom's eyes sparkle like a boy about to build a treehouse out of dynamite and optimism. You explain to him that Jim is locked in a shed, guarded by simple locks, and that all you really need is a quiet moment to snatch the key and slip away. Tom stares at you like you've just suggested eating a sandwich without mustard. Too easy, he insists. Where's the romance, the mystery, the daring escape story future generations will whisper about? So, instead of a clean rescue, you're roped into his grand plan. Tunnels, secret notes, coded symbols, even snakes and spiders smuggled into Jim's cell for authenticity. You watch in disbelief as Tom sketches blueprints on scrap paper like some over-caffeinated architect. The thing is, he's genuinely thrilled about Jim's captivity, not because he supports slavery, but because it gives him an excuse for adventure. A mind-bending paradox. Jim's very real suffering is Tom's imaginative playground. Historians still argue whether Twain meant this as a satire of privileged reformers, people who romanticize struggles they'll never endure. Tom, after all, knows Jim is technically already free because Miss Watson has died and freed him in her will. But he never tells you or Jim, preferring to spin a drama. It's equal parts absurd and infuriating, and it says a lot about how people can turn morality into theater when they're not the ones paying the cost. Meanwhile, your days on the Phelps farm become a bizarre routine. Aunt Sally fusses over your muddy socks while you sneak spoons, nails, and bed sheets to fashion. Escape tools. Uncle Silas drones on about crops and sermons, blissfully unaware that a jailbreak is being orchestrated under his roof. The contrast between their domestic calm and your nightly scheming makes you feel like you're starring in two plays at once, one a wholesome family drama, the other a caper comedy. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind one night as you and Tom dig a tunnel with case knives. During the siege of Candia in the 17th century, soldiers actually tunneled under city walls using cutlery and crude tools. It sounds ridiculous, but desperate times lead to desperate improvisations. The difference, of course, is that those soldiers weren't pretending. You glance at Tom, who wipes dirt on his cheek for dramatic effect, and wonder if he's auditioning for an audience only he can see. Jim, bless him, plays along. At first, he looks at you both like you've lost your minds. But then, when Tom explains the elaborate details, Jim nods slowly and even grins. Maybe he senses the absurdity, maybe he doesn't want to crush Tom's enthusiasm, or maybe humor is the only way to bear the weight of chains. In his calm patience, you find a kind of grace. He's the one suffering, yet he lets the children play at heroics around him. Each night, you smuggle little things into Jim's shed, notes written in blood, actually tomato juice, a ladder made from bed sheets, and even snakes, which go about their slithery business in corners while Jim rolls his eyes. You whisper apologies when Tom isn't looking, promising Jim that this madness won't last forever. The farm's rhythms continue around you, roosters crowing, laundry flapping in the sun, pies cooling on the windowsill. No one suspects a thing. And yet, beneath that normalcy, there's a strange thrill. You feel like a spy, except your mission has been hijacked by a boy who thinks he's Napoleon. The tension between Tom's whimsy and Jim's humanity gnaws at you. You're caught in between, torn between efficiency and extravagance. A mainstream fact nags at the back of your mind. By the mid-1800s, over 3.2 million enslaved people lived in the southern United States, forming the backbone of its economy. Behind every farm, every porch, every pie cooling in the sun, there was someone like Jim, working, waiting, enduring. The system thrived on invisibility, on pretending lives like his didn't matter. And here you are, trying to chip away at that invisibility, one absurd tomato ink letter at a time. Tom adds another flourish to the plan, a coat of arms for Jim, to be scratched into the shed wall, because every prisoner of nobility needs one. You groan, but you help anyway, carving symbols while wondering what Jim's family would think if they saw this circus. It's gallows humor, painted with boyish excitement. And yet, despite the foolishness, you can't deny the bond deepening between the three of you. The secrecy, the whispered plans, the shared risk, it forges something real out of make-believe. You tuck that thought away, knowing the day will come when the play-acting must end and the chains must truly fall. At last, the plans pile so high they could bury a mule. Tom insists that Jim must scratch mournful poetry on a tin plate with a fork, though you know Aunt Sally will miss the fork in approximately 3 minutes. He demands that Jim keep a pet spider in his cell, because that's what prisoners do in all the best adventure books. Jim looks at you with the kind of patience that saints and exhausted parents reserve for rambunctious children. You shrug, whispering, "Just a little longer." Finally, the day of the escape arrives. You slip through the night air, thick with the scent of magnolia and river mud, your heart pounding like you're sneaking candy from a jar rather than smuggling a man from captivity. Tom, buzzing with glee, insists on every detail: the rope ladder, the notes, the theatrics. You almost expect him to announce an intermission and sell popcorn. Jim, though, moves carefully. Every creak of the shed door sounds like a thunderclap. You guide him across the yard, ducking behind barrels and fences, while Tom scampers ahead like a general leading troops in a play battle. Your hands shake. It's one thing to pretend, another to risk being caught. Historians still argue whether Twain intended this scene as parody or sincerity. Is Tom a biting satire of privilege, someone who treats another man's suffering as a stage? Or is he just a child swept up in boyish fantasy? Either way, in this moment, the absurdity sharpens into danger. Then the inevitable happens: dogs bark. You freeze, whispering frantically for silence, but Tom just grins like the noise is part of the script. Lanterns flicker in the house, voices call out. You scramble, tugging Jim toward the trees. The adrenaline spikes. You could swear your ears ring louder than the dogs. A shot cracks the night. The sound splinters through you, rattling your ribs. You whirl around. Tom staggers, his leg bleeding. He grits his teeth, but even now he's proud of the wound, as though it seals his role as the tragic hero. You want to shake him and laugh all at once. Jim hesitates. Freedom is just there, through the dark trees, the river a whisper away. Yet he turns back, steady and unflinching. He helps you carry Tom, muttering that he won't leave a boy bleeding behind, no matter what the cost. That choice, a man in chains sacrificing his escape to aid a child, slices deeper than the bullet wound. You stumble back toward the Phelps house, the escape, unraveling in a blur. Jim tends to Tom with a gentleness that hushes the chaos. You realize that in this absurd, failed caper, Jim has proven his dignity, his humanity, and his loyalty more clearly than any speech could. A mainstream fact lingers in your thoughts. During the Underground Railroad era, many escape attempts involved far simpler, quieter strategies. Disguises, secret compartments in wagons, or forged papers often succeeded where wild theatrics would fail. Some historians note that successful escapes thrived on practicality, not drama, quite the opposite of Tom's flair. But tonight, practicality has lost. Instead, you sit on the porch with your head in your hands, listening to Tom groan, watching Jim wipe his brow, feeling the absurd weight of it all. Tom got his grand adventure. You got your heart twisted. And Jim, well, Jim is still not free. A quirky tidbit drifts into your head, the kind you'd only remember in a moment of exhaustion. In medieval Europe, there were tales of prisoners tunneling out of castles with nothing but soup spoons. People debate whether those stories are real or exaggerated folklore, but here you are, part of your own exaggerated tale. Somehow, you feel kinship with those long-gone escapees, clattering away at stone walls with cookware. The night air cools. Crickets resume their chorus, as if mocking your failure. You think about how plans, no matter how elaborate, collide with reality. And reality always wins. Tom, even pale and bandaged, manages a smile. Wasn't that splendid? You can only stare, torn between laughing, crying, and collapsing onto the porch. Jim, sitting close, simply shakes his head. His silence speaks louder than all of Tom's grand speeches combined. The dawn leaks across the horizon like a pale spill of milk, washing the Mississippi fields in tired gold. You've barely slept. The dogs are quiet now. Tom is stretched out with his bandaged leg, and Jim sits nearby, his broad shoulders bent but steady. The chaos has thinned into silence, though the consequences hover like smoke that refuses to lift. The Phelps household stirs. Aunt Sally bustles, her skirts swishing, her face tight with worry for Tom. Uncle Silas mutters prayers. Neighbors arrive, their boots crunching on gravel, voices thick with curiosity and suspicion. You stand in the corner, hoping to dissolve into wallpaper. Then it happens, Jim is revealed. Not as a fugitive caught in mid-flight, but as the man who, despite his chance at freedom, stayed behind to tend to a boy who had been nothing but a reckless architect of mischief. Some voices rise in anger, calling for punishment. Others falter, uneasy in the face of such selflessness. Historians still argue whether Twain intended this to mirror the real contradictions of slavery in America. The idea that a man could be judged less than human by law, while displaying humanity more profound than those who claimed ownership over him. Tom, of all people, insists that Jim must be treated gently, almost as if the wound in his leg has cracked open a portal to basic decency. He proclaims, with a grin far too smug for the situation, that he always knew Jim was free. Miss Watson had freed him in her will before she died. The news lands like a rock dropped in still water, sending ripples through every face. Jim was free all along, and all the elaborate plotting, the risks, the tears, the near disaster, had been a game for Tom. You feel the ground tilt. Relief washes over you, but it's tangled with fury. If Jim had been free, why the charade? Why the endless pranks and torment? Why the bullet wound, the barking dogs, the sleepless nights? You glance at Jim, wondering if he'll explode in anger, but he only bows his head, as though the weight of freedom, real freedom, is almost too heavy to lift. A mainstream fact circles in your mind like a reminder. Many enslaved people gained their freedom not through dramatic escapes, but through manumission in wills, sudden shifts in fortune, or rare acts of conscience by owners. Yet even when the paper said, free, life was anything but simple. Laws in southern states often required freed people to leave within weeks, forcing them from family and land they'd known. Freedom on paper, you realize, is only one thread in a much knottier weave. Jim, though, doesn't crow or rage. Instead, he straightens, his voice soft yet firm, and asks after his family, his wife, his children, scattered somewhere downriver. His greatest wish isn't the thrill of escape or the drama of rescue, but the simple, aching hope of reunion. You listen, chest tightening, realizing how small your own dreams seem beside his. Tom lounges, proud of the adventure, acting as though the entire escapade was a summer pageant. You want to shout at him, to shake him awake. But you only bite your tongue. Maybe one day he'll understand. Maybe he won't. Some boys never outgrow their stories. A quirky tidbit pops into your head, probably because exhaustion scrambles your thoughts. In the 18th century, some European prisons allowed wealthy inmates to furnish their cells with personal items, beds, desks, even servants. Meanwhile, common prisoners scraped by with straw mats. Freedom and captivity, it seems, have always been tangled with privilege and perception. Tom's game reminds you of that, as though he'd been play-acting prison from the comfort of a feather bed. The crowd begins to disperse. The scandal dulls into chatter, and eventually the neighbors leave. Aunt Sally sighs in relief, stroking Tom's hair like he's a poor wounded soldier rather than the author of all this madness. You watch her tenderness, unsure whether to roll your eyes or cry. And then there is Jim, standing tall at last. He may not know where his family is, but he knows he can search for them openly now. The chains, legal, symbolic, and real, have cracked. You think back to your time on the raft, the laughter, the shared meals, the way Jim taught you to see stars not just as dots of light but as companions. That man, your friend, is free. Historians debate how radical Twain intended this ending to be. Some argue it undercuts Jim's dignity, reducing his struggle to a boy's prank. Others insist that Jim's quiet heroism, his choice to stay for Tom, shines brighter than the ridiculousness surrounding it. You're inclined to agree with the latter. Sometimes the deepest truths slip through the cracks of foolishness. Evening slides back across the fields. You and Jim sit by the riverbank one last time, the water licking against the shore like an old friend whispering farewell. The raft is gone, the wild drift over, but the memory of it hums between you. He talks of his wife and children, of finding them, of starting again. You nod, the river reflecting orange and silver across your face. The Mississippi doesn't care for endings or beginnings. It flows, relentless, toward the sea, carrying stories and secrets alike. And though you've left the raft behind, you feel it still, like a phantom limb, a reminder that once, drifting through the fog, you found a kind of freedom together. The air carries a hush, as if the whole countryside has exhaled after weeks of tension. You and Huck linger in the quiet, Jim not far off, gazing toward horizons that promise both reunion and uncertainty. The boy beside you scratches at his arm, restless as ever. Aunt Sally has offered to adopt him, to civilize him, to tuck him into tidy clothes and lace his days with prayers and strictness. But you know Huck. He doesn't fit into boxes, doesn't thrive in parlors with velvet drapes. His spirit is stitched to the open air, to the drift of clouds, to the restless whisper of river water. He confides that he can't stay, won't stay. He's had enough of being civilized, as he puts it. You nod because you feel it too. Once you've floated free on the Mississippi, it's hard to imagine shrinking back into rules and routine. The world beyond the river calls, even if it's untamed, even if it's uncertain. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts like a pebble rolling into the current. In the mid-19th century, the frontier was pulling thousands westward. Families packed wagons, chasing fertile land and second chances. The idea of striking out, of carving a life away from the strict patterns of the East, was the heartbeat of America at that moment. Huck's urge isn't unique, it's part of that restless national spirit. But Huck's version isn't about farming or staking claims. It's about not being owned by people, by systems, by anything. He wants freedom the way you want air. Jim walks over, his face calmer now, carrying a quiet strength. He thanks you and Huck, not with loud words, but with a simple glance, steady and warm. He speaks of his plans, to search for his wife and children, to piece together a family that slavery had torn apart. You sense the weight of that hope. It's heavier than any raft you've ever built. And then a quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. In ancient Rome, freed slaves often wore a special cap called a pileus to mark their liberty. Imagine that, freedom as a hat you could put on in the morning. Jim doesn't need a cap. The set of his shoulders, the fire in his eyes, tells you everything. The sun leans low, stretching shadows long across the fields. Huck looks out, chewing at his lip, plotting his next escape. He doesn't say it, but you know he's already half gone. Civilization may be polished, but it's also suffocating. You can almost hear the river whispering to him, promising new bends, new stories, new troubles, and new laughter. Historians still argue whether Huck's refusal of civilization is an act of rebellion or simply immaturity. Is he rejecting society's flaws in a bold stand for freedom, or just avoiding chores and responsibility? Maybe both. But standing there with him, watching Jim breathe free, you feel the answer doesn't matter. What matters is the choice, to move, to seek, to live on one's own terms. The river glimmers, restless, as though laughing softly at the dramas it's carried. You recall nights of fog, days of laughter, meals cooked on crackling fires. You remember Jim's stories of stars, Huck's pranks that nearly killed you with fright, the con men who turned life into farce, and the endless flow of water beneath your feet. That raft may be gone, but it was never just wood lashed together. It was freedom, friendship, and a mirror reflecting everything you didn't know you were searching for. Huck finally turns, eyes bright with mischief and longing. He mutters something about lighting out for the territory. You grin? He won't last long here, not with Aunt Sally's rules looming. And maybe you won't either. Once you've known the wild, it lives under your skin. The night gathers around you, soft and warm. You listen to crickets, to the sigh of grass, to the endless hymn of the Mississippi. You don't say much, it's enough to be here, to feel the world wide open, and to know that stories don't really end. They just drift forward, like the current carrying you into another bend. Now the story softens, the river gliding into memory like a lullaby. You feel the night air cooling against your skin, wrapping you in a gentle hush. The voices of Huck and Jim fade to whispers, as though they are still out there, somewhere, floating under stars that have watched over travelers for thousands of years. The raft drifts farther from your mind, its wooden boards creaking softly, almost like a rocking cradle. Each ripple slows, stretching time, smoothing away the sharp edges of adventure and worry. You picture the Mississippi not as a wild force, but as a steady, calm companion, carrying you without effort, carrying you without demand. Your breaths fall into rhythm with the water's hush, in and out, slower each time. Thoughts loosen, like ropes untying from a dock. Every weight that pressed on you earlier, arguments, chores, worries, restless energy, slips quietly away, leaving only stillness. Even the debates of historians, the chaos of Tom's plans, the harsh laws of the world, those dissolve too, like mist burned off by the morning sun. What remains is simple: a wide river, a friend at your side, and the knowledge that freedom, in its truest form, lives in small, quiet choices. The stars above stretch into infinity, patient and unhurried. You feel their light brushing against you, steady and eternal. The night hums softly around you, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. So let yourself drift. Let the raft of your thoughts float gently downstream. There is no hurry, no danger here. Only the steady, endless river, flowing forward, carrying you into calm, carrying you into rest. Sleep now. Dream easy.